Bruchim Abba and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very, very special night of inspiration. Chazak is really, really proud to once again host a man that inspires thousands upon thousands of people all over the world, Rabbi Jacobson Shlita. I'd like to start off the program by reading two chapters of Tehillim for the Matzah, for the situation that's going on in Eretz Yisrael in Israel right now. We encourage everyone to take out a Tehillim. We'll be reading chapter 121, Kuf Chaf Aleph. Let's do it all together. We have so many people that are logged in, Baruch Hashem, that are going to be inspired to hit our tongue. We should hear good news. Only the start of what. So we're going to start with Kuf Chaf Aleph 121. Shila Ma'alot, Sayin La'ari, Ayin Voizi, Itzili Adonai, Ose Shamayim Va'aretz, Al Yiten Lamot Raglecha, Al Yanu Shomerecha, Hinei Lo Yanu V'Lo Yishan, Shomer Yisrael, Adonai Shomerecha, Adonai Tzilcha Ad Yitnecha, Yomam HaShemesh Lo Yakeka V'Yareach B'Layla, Adonai Yishmorcha Mikorah, Yishmor Et Nafshecha, Adonai Yishmor Tzedcha U'Vecha, Me'ata V'Ad Olam. Next chapter, next capital of Tehillim will be Kuf Lamed 130. Shir Hamalot, Mimamakim Karaticha Adonai, Adonai Shema B'Koli, Tien Ozecha Kashuvot Lekol Dachanonai, Im Avonot Tishmarya, Adonai Mi Amod, Ki Imcha Slicha Aleman Tevareh, Kiviti Adonai Kivsha Nafshi, Ulidvaro Achalti, Nafshi Adonai Mi Shomrim Laboker, Yachel Yisrael Adonai, Ki Manai Chesed B'Mem Rafedut, V'hu Yifed Yisrael Mikol Amontav. Again, we're being welcome to a very special night of inspiration. I'd like to thank our sponsors for tonight's special program, Free Shavuot Night of Inspiration. The Fried and Merwinstein families dedicated in loving memory of Jack Friedman, Yaakov Yosef Ben Natan Nata. Zechanol Baruch, blessed memory.
Thank you.
Shemash Evan Aliyah, and the family shall only hear Besorah Devote, only Smachot, only happy occasions.
Amen.
Really appreciate it for all your friendship and all your support throughout the years, and it really means a lot to us. As we all know, the mission of Chazak really, Baruch Hashem, has been growing. Chazak Hashem, Baruch Hashem, inspiring thousands of public school students all over, Baruch Hashem, giving them a Jewish education. Right now, right before Shavuot, which is Matan Torah, which is when we received the Torah, we got the Torah.
They're doing now words of introduction,
Ready, willing, able to give over the
and we'll
Torah
begin in a
to
few
people.
moments. It's a program by Chazak, preparing for Shavuos, just finished prayers for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land, and now there's words of introduction, and we will begin momentarily. Thank you everybody for gracing us this evening. Tomorrow morning, we have a 9:45 a.m. special class for Shavuos, right here on theyeshiva.net. Tuesday morning, 9:45 a.m. Everybody is welcome. Special pre-Shavuos class. 1 o'clock tomorrow, p.m. We have Tomer Dvorah, the Palm of Dvorah, the classic book of ethics. It's a 10-minute class tomorrow at 1. Thursday morning, 7:30 a.m. We continue that exceptional discourse by the Baal HaTanya that we're learning now about planting, grinding, kneading, and baking in the spiritual life of the person.
Our website and be a partner with Chazak.
We'll begin momentarily. Thank you everybody for gracing us. We're still hearing words of introduction from the director of Chazak. Chazak, Chazak.
One last shout out is that every Tuesday night we're starting a Harmony Tuesday protocol. We have renowned guest speakers coming and we talk about very different protocols. Tomorrow night I'm having the honor of interviewing Harry Rotten, renowned lecturer, a man that influences and inspires many people, very, very inspiring lecture pre-Shavuot. Right after Shavuot, we'll be hearing from Rabbi Yaakov Mizrachi on the power of Shabbat. And Rabbi Jacobson, we hope to have you very soon on the program as well. We've had many other great rabbis and speakers that will work on it.
Thank you, thank you.
It is my privilege, my honor to call upon a man that needs no introduction. He's been by many big Chazak events and programs.
Thank you.
And honor to have Rabbi Jacobson live with us. And we want to thank our partners, our friends at Torah Anytime for hosting this event as well. Without further ado, let's welcome my dear friend Rabbi Jacobson.
Thank you so much. So, just make sure you could, just give me a thumbs up. You could see me and hear me? Okay, perfect.
Rabbi, 2 thumbs up.
Thank you so much. Okay. So the first thing is, I am really thankful to you for your very kind words, and so thankful to Chazak for this privilege and honor and invitation to be able to address so many of our dear brothers and sisters in these special, very loaded and intense days coming up to the great holiday when we became a people, when we became a nation. It's the story of our identity. Everything that we have been through over the last 3,333 years is all due to that moment when we stood at Sinai. That's the beginning, it's the birth, it's the genesis of our people. It's the beginning of our story. And the beginning of our story really contains our entire story. So everything, it's amazing that 3,500 years later, we can still hear the echoes of Sinai. If you just read the news of Israel, just today, what's happening right now as we speak in Israel. And we just prayed for our brothers and sisters in Israel, and it's a challenging situation, you know. They're calling it a protest. Every other country would call it a declaration of war. Not a protest, but a declaration of war. But in Israel, the rules are different. When it comes to the Jews, the rules are different. Why? It comes back to Sinai. So this holiday that we're approaching is not just, you know, another Jewish festival to eat cheesecake and lasagna and have a good coffee and wonderful pasta with cheese, which by all means enjoy it very much. Speak to your nutritionist first before you decide what to digest on Shavuos. But it's really the holiday that allows us to focus on what it means to be a Jew, who we are as the Jewish people, as God's people, as the nation of eternity, Am HaSefer, the people of the book, the people of Torah, or in the words of Rabbi Saadia Gaon, written in the 10th century, our nation is a nation because of Torah. It's our very identity, it's our very raison d'etre, our very mission statement. And I and all of us salute the work of Chazak, our host this evening, for their incredible work to help bring this awareness of what it means to be a Jew, of Jewish identity, to so many young Jews, boys and girls, who are not privy to a Jewish education, to introduce them to the timeless values of their people, to their heritage, to their story, to their history, and for all of the sacred work that Chazak does here in New York and the impact that it has over so many Jews. And that includes all of the classes and all the seminars and all the shiurim and all the lectures, including tonight's lecture. And I thank you so much for your work and for giving me this platform and privilege. I thank Torah Anytime for this partnership as well. Thank you all, and I thank all of you who have gathered here this evening, or those of you who are going to watch the replay or listen to the replay, for being here. And I want to wish Chazak, I guess, the most appropriate blessing, and that is Chazak, Chazak, v'nis chazek. Be strong and stronger, and let's strengthen each other to go from strength to strength in saturating the world with the depth, the truth, the light, and the love of Torah, the celebration of mitzvahs, the vitality of Yiddishkeit, to all of our brothers and sisters, wherever they may be, of all demographics, and of all backgrounds, and of all affiliations, and of all persuasions, because we're one people, united by one Torah for eternity. And the work of Chazak is really inspiring, it's thrilling, it's incredible, and it's really the work that belongs to each and every single one of us in our own unique way. The Medrash says that if one Jew would have been missing at Sinai, God could not give the Torah. What do you mean? You have Moshe, Moses, you have Aaron, you have the giants, the scholars, great people. If one Jewish child, anyone, would have been absent, the Medrash says, if one would have not been there, the Torah could have not been given. Why? Because every single Jew is an indispensable note in the cosmic symphony. And the truth is, it's exactly like a Torah scroll. If one letter is missing, the whole scroll is disqualified. What's the big deal? A letter is missing. It's not this week's portion. We read it 20 weeks ago. We're going to read it in 30 weeks. What's the big deal? We'll fix it. Why is the whole Torah disqualified? Logically, it doesn't make sense. Imagine somebody tells me, I take out a book, Lahavdil. Book has 1,400 pages. And somebody says, oh, you can't read the book because on page 1,041, there's a letter missing. I'll look at the guy and say, you need help. First of all, so there's a letter missing. And even if there's a letter missing and we have to correct it, how does that affect every other page and every other letter, every paragraph of the book? What's the big deal? We'll already infer what the letter is. And it's not even this week. I'm going to be getting to it only in 10 months from now. But with Torah, it's not that way. Because it's an organic, holistic, unified, integrated entity, completely unified. So you take away one letter, you didn't take away one letter. You disqualified the entire Torah because it's one indivisible entity. It's like somebody says, I'm married. Somebody once told me, I'm married. I sent my wife away, but I'm still married. There's no such a thing. You sent your husband away, you sent your wife away. I'm not discussing whether there was good reason for it. I'm discussing the fact it's not a marriage. Marriage is two people by definition. The Torah is not one letter is missing. Every letter is essential. It's essential. It's one etzem. It's one essential, holistic, organic entity that's indivisible. So now you take away from it. You didn't take away part of it. You took away all of it. You disqualified it. And this is a very powerful perspective how we have to look at the Jewish people. It's not there's a Jew, another Jew, another Jew. I may like you, I may not like you, I may get along with you. It's indivisible. If one Jew was not present at the giving of the Torah, the whole Torah couldn't have been given because something essential was missing. Which is why it's such a powerful custom and tradition that all Jews come on Shavuos to hear the Aseres HaDibros, to hear the 10 Commandments, the way they're read in the shul on the first day of Shavuos, because the Medrash says that God says every year when you read the 10 Commandments on Shavuos, it says, I'm re-giving you the Torah. So just like the first time every Jew was there, every year we should try every Jew to be there, men, women, children. And if you have influence on Jews who may not come to shul, but Shavuos, the time when God gives us again the Torah, it belongs to every single Jew. And for me to get the Torah, I need you to get the Torah because we're all one indivisible essence. So my dear friends, on this note, let's really tune in to what is I think something that people are thinking about recently and reflecting on. I want to just articulate it from a particular perspective. And that is, there's a very famous statement in the Medrash. It's in Medrash Vayikra, Leviticus, chapter 9. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Reb Nachman, said, 26 generations existed before the Torah was given. If you enumerate the generations from Adam till Moses, so we Jews wrote down everything. We can go back through history, literally generation to generation to generation, all the way to the beginning. There was 26 generations before the Torah was given. So the Medrash says something fabulous. Esrim v'shisha doiris kadma derech eretz es haTorah. Derech eretz, which is usually translated as the way of the world, or as many of the commentators translate it as manners, ethical behavior, appropriate behavior, preceded the Torah by 26 generations. And that's why it says in Bereshis, in the first portion, Genesis chapter 3, Lishmar es derech eitz hachayim. God wanted to protect the path that takes you to the tree of life. So he says, derech zu derech eretz. The path that takes you to the tree of life, this is called the path of derech eretz, the path of kindness and ethical behavior. That is the path that leads you to the Eitz HaChaim, to the tree of life, which is Torah. Torah is compared to the tree of life. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says something similar in the Ethics of the Fathers, chapter 3, Pirkei Avos Perek Gimel, Imein Torah in derech eretz, imein derech eretz in Torah. If there's no Torah, there's something going to be missing in your derech eretz. But if there's no derech eretz, there can't be Torah. What is derech eretz? So the Bartanura, many other commentators translate it as the way you deal with people, with kindness, with sincerity, with respect, with dignity. What's called in Yiddish, Menschlichkeit, humanness. Basic Menschlichkeit, a sense of empathy and connection with other people. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, one of the greatest sages of the day, says, if there's no derech eretz, there can't be Torah, ain't Torah. Pirkei Avos Perek Gimel. And from this comes the famous expression, derech eretz kadma l'Torah. Derech eretz precedes Torah. And this, I think, we always have to emphasize, especially today, the powerful dignity that Yiddishkeit confers on derech eretz, on the way I deal with people, the way I approach people, the way mahandelt in Yiddish, the way you navigate your dealings with other people, whether it's an encounter on the street or in the gas station or on the subway or in the airport or at a tourist site or anywhere else, in your business, in shul, in the marketplace, in my home. But it's basically my interactions with people, loved ones, family, spouse, children, parents, siblings, relatives, friends, acquaintances, community members, and strangers, Jews and non-Jews. And here I introduce a teaching from the great Maggid of Mezrich. The Maggid of Mezrich was one of the great spiritual leaders and teachers of his day. We don't know the year he was born. We do know the year he passed away. Yutes Kislev Tovkov Lamed Gimel, 1772. The end, December 1772. The 19th of Kislev Tovkov Lamed Gimel, 5533. He was the successor of the famous Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement, who passed away in the year Tovkov Chav 1760 on Shavuos. The Baal Shem Tov passed away on Shavuos, and 1 year later, he was succeeded by his student, Rabbeinu Doiv Ber, the Rebbe Rebbe, known as the Maggid of Mezrich, because he lived in Mezrich, which is a little city in the Ukraine. The Baal Shem Tov is buried in Medjugorje, also in the Ukraine, passed away Shavuos. A year later, the Maggid took him over, succeeded him Shavuos Tovkov Chaf Aleph, Shavuos 1761, and he was the leader of the young fledgling Hasidic movement for the next 12 years until his passing in 1772. The Maggid of Mezrich, Reb Doiv Ber, has a very powerful, homiletical Hasidic teaching on another mission in the Ethics of the Fathers, Pirkei Avos, Perek Gimel. And I'll read to you the Mishnah and give you the translation. It's a very sharp and potent translation. And the first time I saw it, it was like, ouch. I'm laughing, but it was like, wow. You know, if you're sensitive and you're open to it, it can hit the spot in a positive way. So the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, Ethics chapter 3, Amar Rabbi Yaakov taught, Hamahalech baderech yichidi. If somebody, you know what, I like looking inside, so let me take out a Pirkei Avos. Excuse me. Should be Pirkei Avos, Perek Gimel, and the zip code of Mishnah Zion or Shal. Let's see. Yeah. Rabbi Yaakov says, "Hamahalach b'derech." If somebody is walking on the road, he's taking a hike, v'shoyne, and he's learning Torah, umafsik b'mishnasa, and he interrupts his learning. Literally, he interrupts himself from his learning. V'oimre, and he says, "Manoy ilonza." How gorgeous is this tree? Manoy nirza. How beautiful is this landscape? Maila lavakosov kilamaschayev benafshay. The Torah considers it as though he endangered his life. He put his life into danger. It's a very difficult Mishnah to understand. This person was walking. He was taking a hike. He was taking a stroll. He was taking a walk. He was traveling. He's on the road. And he's learning Torah. Either he's thinking Torah, he's talking Torah to himself, he's schmoozing with somebody else. And then he interrupts his learning. And he extols the beauty of the landscape, the beauty of the tree, the beauty of the landscape. So he says the Torah considers this a mortal sin, a fatal sin. He's like endangering his life. But what did he do? He was praising God's creation. In fact, our sages instituted many blessings that we make when we observe various phenomena of nature that triggers a sense of gratitude and wonder and marvel. Our sages themselves, you look at King David HaMelech in the book of Psalms. Often he extols the beauties of creation. The famous Barchi Nafshi that we're going to say on Rosh Chodesh. Psalms chapter 104, Barchi Nafshi, where he goes into Marabu, Ma'asecha, Hashem Kulu B'chacham Asisa, the diversity and the wisdom of creation and of every creature. It shows the brilliance, the marvel. Maimonides writes in the Laws of the Foundations of Torah, Hilchos Yesod Torah, chapter 2, that there's a mitzvah to love God and have fear of God, or reverence, and how do you achieve it? And he says, when you contemplate on the extraordinary creation that the Rebbeinu Shalom, that God has created, and he elaborates on it at length, and he says, that's why I'm dedicating a few chapters to discuss some of these marvels and wonders of creation. What does Rabbi Yaakov mean? So there are different interpretations that have been presented throughout the generations. One is a homiletical interpretation by the Maggid. And to appreciate his interpretation, we have to focus on the words. It says, Hamahalach b'derech. He's walking on the road. V'shayne, he's learning. Umafsik b'mishnaseh. And he interrupts himself from his learning. It seems redundant, right? I could have just said he was learning, umafsik, and he interrupted. He interrupts. We know what he interrupts, whatever he was doing. It's like if I'm talking and you interrupt me, I say, stop interrupting. I don't have to say what you're interrupting, it's obvious. It says he was walking on the road, v'shayin, and he was learning, umafsik, and he interrupted, and he said, how beautiful is this tree? The word memishnase seems superfluous. Furthermore, the word umafsik is also superfluous. Could have just said he was walking on the road and he was learning, and he says how beautiful the tree is. Obviously, in order to say that, he interrupted his learning. So obviously, those two words in the Mishnah are the key words that really capture the essence of what Rabbi Yaakov is teaching us. And then why does the Mishnah say, he says how beautiful this tree is, how beautiful this landscape is, these two examples that are used? What is the meaning of this? So the Mezritcher Maggid says, the idea is that he's a mahalach b'derech. He's walking on the road of life. He's on the path of life. He says, and he's learning Torah. Umafsik mimishnasoy. Not he interrupts his learning. It doesn't say umafsik mishnasoy. Umafsik limude. It says umafsik mimishnasa. Says the Maggid. He's walking on the road. And you know what derech is? He says hoylech b'derech hayosher. Hamahalech b'derech. He's actually walking on the right path. Derech. He's on the derech, like you say. On the derech, off the derech. This guy is on the derech. Marvelous interpretation. In fact, the beginning of chapter 2 of Pirkei Avos is Rabbi Yomer Ezi Derech Yisharish Yavar Layadam. Let's talk about the right path. So chapter 3, this guy is walking on the right path. Umafsik. But that path gets interrupted. Mimishnase, from his learning. It's the learning that causes him and takes him away from the right path. Umafsik. The hefsik, the interruption happens, mimishnase, from his learning. It's the learning that causes this interruption. Why? He's learning Torah. The answer is, because what happens sometimes is, the Maggid says, Shabasaloi gadlus v'hispirus machmas mishnase. The learning, instead of refining him and turning him into a humble human being, and into a gorgeous human being, and into a sensitive human being, the learning sometimes causes him a sense of arrogance, a sense of vanity, a sense of futile pride, a sense of arrogance, a sense of I'm holier than thou, superior to everybody else. Instead of learning Torah, causing me to be able to see the divine inside of me, and therefore to see the divine within every single person, turns me into a person who's more menschlich, who's more empathetic, who has more compassion, who has more kindness. What happens is the opposite. The learning itself causes me to lose the divine plot. It takes me away from the essence of Torah. Hillel told a non-Jew who came to him and says, teach me the whole Torah when I'm standing on one leg. Shabbos, Daf Lamed Aleph, Tractate Shabbos 31. Teach me the whole Torah standing on one leg. How long can you stand on one leg for? Let's say 30 seconds. Hillel says, I don't need 30 seconds. I'll give it to you in 5 seconds. What you dislike to be done to you, don't do to anybody else. That is the whole Torah. Everything else is commentary. Now go study the commentary. In other words, Hillel, the great Hillel, who lived around 100 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. And he founded the school of Beis Hillel. And he wanted to describe what is the whole Torah, the essence of Torah. It's basically treating another person like you want to be treated yourself. And everything else in Torah is commentary on this statement. So that means that anything I'm learning in Torah is supposed to bring me to a deeper place of love, a deeper place of connection, a deeper place of the awareness of somebody else, a deeper place of midas tovos, of powerful values that make me sensitive and empathetic and understanding the plight, the needs, the condition, the reality of another person. In other words, real Torah makes me a less judgmental person, a more expansive person. It allows me to see the godliness in every person and really in every creature, in every reality that exists in the world. It allows me to see the ruchnius, the koyach hapoyel benifel, the spirituality in every single reality. But in this case, the Maggid says, umafsik mi mishnasa, from the Mishnah itself, from the learning itself, he gets severed. As the Gemara says in Masechta Yuma, that sometimes the Torah, if a person has a schus, the Torah becomes samchayim, becomes a potion for life. Lo yizacha, says the Gemara in Yuma. People are learning now Yuma. Ayun Beis, I think. Lo yizacha, nasas lo yisama mavas. If a person doesn't have the merit, the Torah becomes lethal, it becomes poisonous. Torah is poisonous? No. Lo yizacha, nasas lo yisama mavas. Torah is holy, Torah is divine. But the way the person registers it, internalizes it, absorbs it, it becomes poisonous for him. Nasa lo yisama mavas. Sometimes you can have the greatest vitamin in the world, but for this person it's poisonous. Because this person misconstrues, this person misinterprets, this person doesn't understand. They're absorbing and utilizing the Torah to feed their own traumas. And when I'm using the Torah to feed and sustain my own traumas, my own fears, my own insecurities, my own narcissism, my own OCD, my own personality disorders, my own mood disorders, my own mental illness, my own depression, my own psychosis, my own borderline. or whatever other illness or challenge I'm dealing with, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual. And instead of seeing the Torah as a blueprint to help me deal with my struggle in an honest and authentic and vulnerable way, I use the Torah to cover up my insecurities, to cover up my issues, to cover up my problems, and to despise and loathe anybody who challenges my ego. And sometimes the more I learn, the more dangerous I become. And the more I learn, the more narcissistic I become. And the more I know, the more impossible I become. Because, look at me, I'm so knowledgeable, and I have so many sources, and I'm even called a Talmid Chacham. I'm a great Torah scholar. And in the name of that, I can be dismissive. I can be arrogant. I can be abusive. I can be insensitive. I could sometimes be obnoxious and rude. Oy, oy, oy. What happens now is I took the divine potion for life, and because of my inability, my incompetence, my unwillingness to confront my egos, my insecurities, my own traumas, I now impose it on Torah. I turn the Torah into a destructive force because the way I'm using it. Okay, I went off a little bit here. Back to the Maggid. So here's a person that leaves the right path. Umafsik. This path gets interrupted. Mimishnasai. Because of the learning. From the learning, as he says, Machmas mishnasai. The learning itself causes him a futile sense of arrogance. This sometimes happens to people. It's very sad. It's also very pathetic. I use religion itself. I use my scholarship and my learning and my Torah itself to live a life that is completely contrary to the whole spirit of Torah, to the Weltanschauung of Torah, to the whole message of Torah. The whole message of Torah, Hillel says, is to see the godliness in every person, to bring out the best in people, never to treat somebody in a way that you don't want to be treated. As Rabbi Akiva said, it's a great principle of Torah. And the Maggid says, you know how this is expressed? This person says, Manoy ilon zeh, how beautiful is this tree? Manoy nirza, how beautiful is this landscape? He says, what is he talking about? The Mishnah here is intimating something. The Torah compares a person to a tree. In Parshas Shoftim, Book of Deuteronomy, a person is a tree of the field. The Navi Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah, compares the person to a landscape. He says, Niru lachem nir. I want you to plow yourself and turn yourself into a landscape before you plant. So the Maggid says the sages were very sensitive to the language of Tanakh. This is an intimation, this is a remez, this is a hint. This person, as a result of his learning, umafsik, he gets cut off from the right path, he gets cut off from the shayna, from the learning, because of the learning. And he's now busy saying, Manoi ilon zeh, how beautiful is this tree. In the words of the Magen, Al atzmai omer kein believe, but he's talking about himself. He develops this selfishness, this narcissism, this foolish sense of boastfulness, thinking about himself. I'm at the center of the world. How gorgeous is this tree? Talking about himself. A person is a tree. How gorgeous is this landscape? Talking about himself. He's endangering his life spiritually and therefore physically. Meaning, he's completely endangering his life, his soul, because the essence of the soul is that it's humble, it's divine, it's a chelik elokam, it's part of a larger whole, it's part of a larger, greater picture, it's part of infinity. And the worst thing, the greatest enemy to experiencing infinity, to experiencing truth, to experiencing a higher reality is the sense of arrogance, which usually results in insecurity, which usually results in more arrogance to be able to cover up my insecurity. So he says, when the focus becomes how beautiful I am, how gorgeous I am, the person is now obsessed with self-consciousness. What do I look like? And what do they think of me? And how am I doing? And what type of reputation I have? And a person cannot liberate himself or herself from self-consciousness. And the more I learn, the more self-conscious I become. And the more hubris, and the more self-inflation, and the more holiness, and the more selfishness. How gorgeous I am. So gorgeous tree, a gorgeous landscape. Don't confuse this with recognizing your qualities. It's very important for a person to have a recognition of their qualities and their virtues and their milas. Chofetz Chaim used to say, Lashon Hara, not only not about others, you don't speak gossip about yourself either. It's important to have awareness of who you are and what your contribution is and what your strengths are. But the Maggid is talking about a person who allows the learning itself to turn them into a character that is really suffering from a lot of haughty vanity and futile hubris. Manoa ilon zeh, manoa nir zeh, maila lavakosov ki'ilu mischayev benafshe. Here we have a classic example and interpretation, just chose one, of the concept of how important it is that the learning of Torah, the practice of Torah, comes together with a sense of decency, menschlichkeit, humility. A wonderful story I heard from the person himself. It's a Jew who lives in Pittsburgh, a very special man. His name is Reb Meir Goldwasser. And Reb Meir told this to me a number of years ago. He says, I was a yeshiva boy, learning in Tellstone, in Eretz Yisrael. He said, when I was living in America, I think he was learning in the Tells in Cleveland, in the Tells Yeshiva. He said, throughout my years, I would often phone Reb Moshe Feinstein, Zechet Tzadik Livracha. Reb Moshe lived on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Mesivta, Tiferes Yerushalayim, for many years. And Reb Moshe, anybody who knew him and remembers the Lower East Side of those days, lived a very humble life. You know, he walked himself and he answered the telephone himself and anybody could come over to speak to him. And by the way, the Lower East Side till today retains a certain shtel because of Reb Moshe's influence over so many decades, just for the record. And he says, I was learning in Tellstone and I had some halacha question. So I thought to myself, let me call up Reb Moshe. And I had the number to his apartment. And Reb Meir tells me, and I ring. And Reb Moshe picks up the phone. And he says, hello. He was mimicking, hello? And then I hear from his voice. I just woke him up. And I realized, I'm in Israel. And I was calling in the morning. And I forgot that in New York, it's 2 or 3 in the morning. I called Reb Moshe in the middle of the night, literally schlepped him out of bed, woke him up. He's like, hello? Reb Meir says, I was so embarrassed. I said, Oyan Schuldigt, I apologize, I'm calling you from Israel. I didn't realize I'm waking up. The Rosh Yeshiva in the middle of the night. I'm sorry. And I'm about to hang up. Reb Moshe says, no, don't hang up. Don't hang up. But I need a few minutes. Wait on the phone, I need a few minutes. And Reb Meir said, I felt so bad, and I understood. He probably wanted to wash his hands, make the blessings. He's going to answer a question. He probably wanted to make a berachas HaTorah, a blessing that we make in the morning before we start learning Torah. He took a few-minute break. Whatever it was that he needed to tend to, it took quite a few minutes. He comes back to the phone. He apologizes for the delay. And he says, how can I help you? And I ask Reb Moshe the question, the shayla. And Reb Moshe listens. And he gives me an answer. Great. I thank him. And he says, give me your address. I would like to have the address where you are at. And I'm wondering, why does he need my address? And then I thought maybe Reb Moshe has a custom that everybody who asks him a question, he might write down the question and the answer, and perhaps he mails it to the person who asked, so the person will have it in writing. That was my speculation, perhaps why he's asking me for my address, but I didn't ask questions. I gave Reb Moshe my address, he took it down. I said goodbye, I thanked him, he said goodbye, and I hung up the phone. A few weeks later, Reb Meir tells me, mail comes to me in yeshiva, Reb Moshe Feinstein. I open up the envelope. It's a check with a little note. And Reb Moshe says, I have to apologize. You called me. and I kept you on the phone for quite a few minutes, and I know that it's an expensive call. You were calling from Israel. Remember, a lot of people don't even understand what I'm talking about in 2021. But you have to understand that in the 1970s, a call from Israel to New York was very expensive. And every minute that you were on the call was expensive. It cost money. So Rabbi Moshe said, and because you waited on the phone because of me, so therefore, and I found out how much money it probably cost, so I'm sending you a check here for this money that I owe you because of the amount of minutes that I made you wait until I got back onto the phone after you phoned me. And Rabbi Meir Goldwasser tells me, he says, Rabbi, why? I call this person in the middle of the night. I wake him up. I wake him up. Yeah? Some people would get upset, would hang up the phone on me, would give me a piece of their mind. Okay, he didn't. He sends me money because he made me wait on the phone. Of course, because I woke him up in the middle of the night and he had to tend to some needs and do some stuff before he got on the phone. It teaches you about a person. It gives you perspective. It teaches you about what Torah does to a person. I shared once a story. I heard this last time I was in Israel, a little before Corona. A Yid from Bnei Brak. He tells me that the Panovitcher Rav, Rabbi Yosef Shlomo Kahneman, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, as you know, he built in Bnei Brak orphanages for orphan children. He had for boys, he had for girls. And one of these orphanages had a bunch of girls who were orphaned. They didn't have parents. And a Jew comes to the Panovitcher Rav one day and he says, Panovitcher Rav, we have a big problem. What happened? These girls were growing up and they would have Friday night meals together in their home where they lived. And you know what happens, right? They're having meals and they started to sing. And they were singing loud and this neighbor hears the girl singing. So he comes to the Panovitcher Rav and he says, you have to stop this. It's not right. Kol b'yishav. I'm not allowed to hear women sing. I'm not allowed to hear girls sing. And I'm the neighbor. And they sing loud. Tell them, no singing at the Shabbos meals. There's neighbors. I'm not allowed to hear them singing. The Panovitcher Rav understood that this is it's a delicate question. He wasn't just going to go tell the girls no singing anymore. So he told the Jew, I hear the problem. Allow me to consult with the Chazon Ish. Chazon Ish was still alive. Rabbeinu Avram Yeshaya Karel, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha, he passed away. Kislev Yudalad, Cheshvan or Kislev, the end of 1953. So he was still alive. He went to the Chazon Ish to consult with him. What's the proper response? And he starts telling the Chazon Ish, obviously in Yiddish, they were talking Yiddish. He tells him the story. And the story is basically, there's these girls in the orphanage who Friday night are singing songs and the neighbor hears them and he gets upset and he comes running to. As he's telling the story about these girls singing, the Chazon Ish interrupts the Panovitcher Rav Kahneman in the middle of the story. And he says, Azoi, azapsura toiva, the Meidlach singen, the Meidlach freien sich eine mit der andere, the Meidlach feiern Shabbos. Wow. What good news you're giving me. How special this piece of information. These girls, orphans, grew up without fathers, without mothers, and yet they have reached a point in life where they can celebrate together. They feel that they can trust life enough to be able to express it in song and melodies and jubilation. They have the joy and the giggle of life has been restored to them to the point that they can celebrate Shabbos together and sing, wow, this is such positive, powerful news. The Panovitcher Rav couldn't even get himself to finish the story and ask the question. The response was very obvious. You're dealing here with orphans. They lost everything. Friday night they come together and they found within themselves the stamina and the vitality to enjoy life, to rebuild their lives with friendship, with camaraderie, to enjoy Shabbos, to sing songs together. What an extraordinary moment to celebrate. Now you'll ask me a question. The Chazon Ish and the Panovich Rav didn't know about the issue. They knew about the issue very well. But the point is, you have an issue, go to shul. Finish your meal. The girl starts saying, go to shul, learn Shagasaya, learn the Sivis HaMishpat, learn Choshen Mishpat, learn Baba Basra, Masechta Chulin, if you want it could be Erevin or Psachim or Masechta Yuma, until 2 in the morning, and then you'll come home to sleep. If that's not even good enough, move for Shabbos to Yerushalayim. You'll figure it out. But when Yiddishkeit is divorced from that empathy, from that connection to people's feelings, from understanding who people are and what they're going through and appreciating their backgrounds and their challenges, their journeys, then the Torah itself becomes a samamav, as the Torah itself is stripped from its dignity, not because the Torah Khalil is stripped, but because the person absorbing it, completely misconstrues it. They don't get the point. It's a great story. I once heard by Hasidim, they're very careful about gebrochts. Matzah shouldn't get wet on Pesach. This is one of the stringencies in the world of the Hasidim. And the reason is, after the matzah bakeries were introduced, they felt that the matzah is baked so fast. The Balatanya has a tshuva about this, famous tshuva. Matzah is baked so fast, and therefore perhaps there may be some particles of flour that weren't baked, and if the matzah gets wet, it can become chametz. This is called the stringency of matzah shreya gebrochts. There was once at a meal, a Pesach meal, of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchok Shneus and Rebbe Rayatz. He passed away in New York in 1950. And there was a Jew there who came from another community, and there was what's called vinaigrette on the table. You know what vinaigrette is? Like beets. And he took his matzah, and he dipped it in the beets. Now, among many Hasidim, they're stringent not only not to dip the matzah in water, but any liquid. So he dipped the matzah in the beets, in the beet sauce, in the beet liquid, in the beets, whatever there was on the table. So the person or the people standing near him, the yeshiva boys, got very upset. In front of the Rebbe Rayatz, he's making the matzah wet. So they gave him a piece of their mind. They told him, what are you doing? The Rebbe was on the other side of the table, and he asked Reb Shmuel Levitin, was one of his Hasidim, what's the commotion there? So Reb Shmuel found out, and he said that there's a Jew dipped the matzah and the beets. So they got upset. They're telling him it's not what we do, it's inappropriate, you don't do it. And the Rebbe looked at them and he said these words in Yiddish: Besser aroiten matzah v'aroiten ponim. Better a red matzah than a red face. It's not that he didn't care about the matzah being dry. He cared a lot about it. It was a serious stringency by Hasidim that comes from the Balatanya. But you have to understand, if your stringency is going to cause you to humiliate somebody, to cause him to blush, by denigrating him, by dismissing him, by disrespecting him, by delegitimizing him, he says, better a red matzah than a red face. Sometimes, though, I just heard a beautiful story that Reb Shmuel Birnbaum, famous Gaon Reb Shmuel Birnbaum, was the Rosh Hashiva of the Mir, Zeichet Tzadik Livracha, and he spoke at the Shloshim of a Jew here from Muncie. His name was Elio Shraga Newhouse, Zechrena Livracha. Passed away Shavuos 23 years ago. So at his Shloshim, Reb Shmuel Birnbaum spoke. Reb Shmuel said that in the yeshiva of Baranovich, Oihel Torah Baranovich, was the yeshiva of Reb Elchanan Wasserman, Hashem Yinkem Damai, who was murdered in Kovna in 1941. There were two boys, and they were close friends. One was a Litvish Bacher, and one was a Chassidish Bacher. One came from Lithuania, and one came from a Chassidic home, Chassidic community. And he says they were very close friends. The person telling the story, Reb Avram Newhouse, the son of Reb Shragi Newhouse, who heard it at the Shloshim of his father, said it sounded from Reb Shmuel that he was the Bacher. It's a story that he didn't say it clearly, but it sounded from him that he was the person with whom the story happened. And he says, one day the Litvish Bacher saw the Hasidic Bacher writing a letter to his Rebbe. He wrote a letter. And in the title he wrote, Harav Hagon Hatzadik. Gon means a great genius, a great Gon, tremendous scholar, great Torah mind. Tzadik means a righteous person. So he was a Litvish Bacher, a Lithuanian Bacher, with all the connotations. So he says, your Rebbe might be a Tzadik, but he's not known to be a Gon. He's not known to be a Gon. It's not his thing. Do you feel that this is an accurate and authentic title? So Reb Shmuel says, the Bacher responds to this boy, and again it sounded like it was to him. He says, Torah has many, many sugyas. Torah has many, many dimensions. Sometimes there's a Gon in Shnaim Oiches and Betalis. Sometimes there's a genius in analyzing the Mishnah, the beginning of Bava Metzia, of two people who come to court, both holding on to a cloak, and everyone claims Kula Shali. And he's brilliant in analyzing it and dissecting it and explaining it and deducing from it and expounding on it, etc. So, but sometimes you have somebody who's a Gon in V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. It's also a part of Torah. He's a genius in loving another person like you love yourself. He's a genius in that. And sometimes there's a Gon in V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha. A Gon in Avos Hashem. He says, trust me, my Rebbe is a Gon. It may not be a Gon in things that you consider the only thing, the only topic that is worthwhile to be a genius in. And Reb Shmuel Birnbaum apparently was very moved by the answer, and he introduced it by the shloshim of this person who was a legendary Bal Chesed, a legendary Bal Tzedakah. The truth is, if I may say, it's all one. It's not even separate things. It's not like you're a Gon in Shnaim Oiches and Betalis, and you're a Gon in V'ahavta l'reacha kamoicha. It's really all one and the same thing. Because Torah, first and foremost, is divine. It's not about intellectual, mathematical equations. It's not about who has a greater IQ, so I can outdo you in learning. The key essence of Torah is Kirvas Alikim. It's divine wisdom. It's the divine will. So the only way I can be a conduit for divine wisdom is through humility, through cultivating my own spiritual refinement. And when I cultivate my own spiritual refinement, I see the goodness in people. I accentuate the goodness in people. I see the godliness in people. But sometimes people hear these ideas, but sometimes we still see it more as another ritual, another law. It's part of a checklist to check off, which means you'll say, okay, today I did this mitzvah, checklist. I also did chesed. I also did kindness. That itself can be robotic. It's like almost a forced form of kindness. Torah wants me to be menschlich, so right now I'm going to behave as though I'm empathetic, as though I'm sensitive. How do we teach to ourselves and how do we teach people that love to another person is organic? It's natural, it's innate. I think women have it much more natural than men for two reasons. First of all, the way God created them. And second of all, that sometimes the way we learn in yeshiva with such a focus on intellectual rigorousness and precisions takes away people from their natural emotions and empathy. It's probably much better today. But I remember sometimes when we're learning in yeshiva, there's so much focus on intellectual brilliance and creativity. And sometimes the person who's celebrated is the person who can prove everybody else wrong. And then you think that those are the skills you need to bring into marriage as well. So if I'm in yeshiva and my teacher, my Rebbe, is giving a presentation, a shiur, and I can prove him wrong, and I can come with a source that show that the foundation of the presentation was erroneous, or I can prove a colleague of mine, a friend, wrong and I'm right, I'm considered a success story of the yeshiva. Now I graduate yeshiva, I go into marriage. So naturally, I want to bring the skills from yeshiva into my marriage. So what's the greatest thing I can do? Prove my wife wrong. And that's what happens. And in a marriage, it's disastrous. What proved so successful in yeshiva, what made you the success story in yeshiva, makes you the failure story in your marriage. You don't need to prove your wife wrong. So there is this divorce, this separation between Torah and real life. But the truth is that if my focus in yeshiva is to prove you wrong, and to prove my teacher wrong so I could show you how brilliant I am, tells the Maggid here, you're missing the whole point of Torah. Of course I want to seek the truth. And of course if I feel that my teacher is not explaining it to me correct and I have a real question, I have to ask. And of course if I feel that my friend is not explaining it right and I have a better approach, I should present the approach. But the focus is searching for the truth. The focus is humility. The focus is emes. The focus is bittul. The focus is was will der Eibishter, nicht was ich will. Focus is what God wants, not what I want. And then when you take that into your marriage, it's a whole different story. You've taken that humility into your marriage, that refinement into your marriage, then it's a whole different type of relationship. Oh, my dearest friends, my dearest, holiest friends, you know, sometimes people see chesed and avos Yisrael as just something else to check off. It's like, I also have the perfection of chesed. It's like, how do we teach ourselves, how do we teach people about an inherent, internal, organic experience of empathy? Not just this fake smile that I put on in order to be able to tell myself, I also have the quality of kindness and therefore I'm going to get a better portion in Gan Eden. But just a warmth, a warmth. Torah needs to come with derech eretz, with varmkeit, with menschlichkeit, with appreciating the godliness in every person. That's what Torah is all about. Torah is making you sensitive to the perspective of the divine in everything in the world, a beginning in a person, in a mind, in a soul, in a heart. How can it be that somebody in the name of halacha doesn't hear the cry of a woman who's being abused or of a man who's being abused? How can somebody who's steeped in Torah be insensitive to the cry of a child who was hurt or traumatized or abused? How is that possible? What type of Torah am I teaching? Are we teaching? What type of Torah am I absorbing? How can it be that instead of Torah cultivating and creating within people that which Torah has to create within people, people who are the most sensitive and the most empathetic to the plight and pain of the other people, people who live and breathe, Lo samad al dam reyach, I will not stand idly when I see somebody's blood being spilled. People who emulate the first teacher of Moshe, who goes out to his brothers. He's not stuck in his cocoon. Vayigdal Moshe vayetze alecha. He becomes great and he goes out to his brothers. And the Medrash says, what makes him great? That he goes out to his brothers. He could stay in his palace, but that doesn't make him great. Vayigdal Moshe, he goes out to his brothers. And the first story we know about the first greatest Rosh Yeshiva and Rebbe, Moshe Rabbeinu, was what? He sees an innocent Jew being abused and beaten. And what does he do? He stands up to the criminal and he saves the person. That's the first story we know about the first and greatest teacher of Torah in all of history. The man who we still call Moshe Rabbeinu. He's our Rebbe, our teacher, till this very day. Torah Tzivilanu Moshe, Zichru Torahs Moshe Avdi. That's what Torah does to a person. Torah cultivates within a person that when you see a crime happening on your block, in your shul, in your neighborhood, in your community, instead of me being passive and instead of turning an eye, instead of saying I'm busy learning and I'm going to go back to my books and bury myself in my books, how can I go back to the books when the whole book is here to tell you that Lo samad al dam reyacha, that zeklal gadol b'Torah, that the essence of Torah is to treat another person with kindness and respect. The essence of Torah is to have a relationship with Hashem. And if you love Hashem, you love His children. Somebody who tells me, I hate you, but I love you, but I hate your kids. You don't love me. If you love me, you love my children. You love what I love. So you're screaming, V'haftas Hashem alekecha, you love Torah. But there's somebody suffering. There's a child. There's a teenager. There's a woman here who's been abused for years by her husband. How could you be quiet? In the name of Torah. The people who carry the flag of Torah, the people who carry the flag of halacha, they have to be the embodiment of empathy, of sensitivity, of standing up to any situation where an innocent person is being neglected or abused or mocked, downtrodden, dejected. Instead, we sometimes use the Torah to defend criminals and to defend our own criminal actions. We lose the plot. Besser aroite matzah, v'aroiten ponim. Let me conclude with a story. I heard the story this last Friday night. So I never shared it before because I never heard it before. I was at a bar mitzvah. Of a close friend of mine, Rabbi Yaakov and Chami Elbogen, who made a bar mitzvah of their son, Elio Shraga, Shlita. And there was a guest who came from Eretz Yisrael for the bar mitzvah. His name is Rabbi Yankel Grossman. Rabbi Yankel Grossman is a Tayir Yid. He grew up in Batei Varsha in Jerusalem, together with his brother, Rabbi Yitzchak David Grossman from Migdal Emek, Migdaler, with their father in Batei Varsha, Rabbi Yisrael Grossman, Rosh Hashiva of Karlin, a big gun, a big Talmid Chacham. And Rabbi Yankel Grossman tells me a ma'isa that he saw with his own eyes. He said it was 1980, and he came for 1 year to learn by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in Tom Chetmimim in Brooklyn, the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. He learned there as a yeshiva bacher for a year, 1 year before he got married. And he says it was Friday night, late Friday night, midwinter, beginning of 1980. And those of you who know the cold winter nights of New York City, with the wind blowing, the temperature could sometimes go to 10, 20 below zero. He says it was such a night. Rabbi Yankel told me, to me, it felt 30 below zero. Whether it was 30, it was 20, it was 15. It was Friday night. He says it wasn't just cold. It wasn't just cold. Sigvan, ice cold. You stood a few minutes outside and you felt that you can't take it anymore. He says it was late at night, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe came out of his room in shul where he would sit and learn Friday night late, and he was walking home. The Rebbe would walk home very quietly himself. He didn't like fanfare and drama, but there were 3 boys who on their own would walk far away from the Rebbe at a distance, just, so the Rebbe shouldn't be alone late at night, walk alone in the street. So they would walk behind him, but it was a pretty significant distance. Now, the Rebbe wasn't dressed for the weather. He didn't have a scarf, he didn't have earmuffs, he didn't have gloves, no Erev there. He had his kapote, his bekisha, and he had a simple wool coat and his hat. He says he walked out. It was so cold, he tells me 30 below zero. And he was one of the boys who was walking behind. The Rebbe would walk home. It was a nice walk. It was from Eastern Parkway and Kingston Avenue to President, between Brooklyn and New York Avenue, if you know the geography of Brooklyn. He says, in the middle of the way, a woman walks over to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And it's late at night, so there's nobody there. There's no gaboyim, there's no assistants, there's no mishamshim, nobody to run the show. And she starts talking to the Rebbe. And he tells me, Rabbi Yankel tells me, a half an hour. He said, I felt so bad. It was so cold. But she was talking, she was asking this and asking that, and the Rebbe spoke to her outside Friday night on the way home, late at night, for a half an hour. And the Bachrim, he says, we're quite upset. We're quite upset. And when she was to finish, we would give her a piece of our mind, right, with no holds bars, tell her exactly what we think about her behavior. First of all, it's Friday night. The Rebbe's on the way home to his wife. They didn't have children. The Rebbe would eat himself with his wife, Rebbe Tzon Mushke, for decades. I don't know if you know, that's interesting. There was no Tish, there was no Fabrengen. Friday night was the Rebbe and his wife alone for decades. Maybe there was a relative, would sometimes come, very rarely. There were not many relatives who survived. So that's first of all. Second of all, the weather. The Rebbe wasn't 20 years old. He was a man, he was almost 80 years old. And a year earlier, 77, he suffered a double massive heart attack. What you call menschlichkeit. The weather was freezing, and the Rebbe wasn't dressed. He wasn't in a down coat with one of the Ukrainian fur hats, that go down with 3 scarves, with earmuffs, with nothing. With Uggs, no Uggs. I don't know if you know, he had torn shoes. It was not, he had torn shoes. You could see the socks on the back of the shoes were torn. He tells me the Bachrim were very upset. A half an hour, or at least it seemed like a half an hour to him, I should say. I don't know if it was exactly a half an hour. Finally, she finished talking. And they thought, okay, what do you say? Baruch Shepatrani, right? Baruch Shepatrani. And the Rebbe would walk home and go to his Rebbetzin. And the woman starts walking towards them. And suddenly they see the Rebbe is not walking. He turns around and he's staring at her and at them. Waits till she passes them. Now, of course, they're not going to scream at her in the presence of the Rebbe, because he told me he was looking at us. Looking at us. Very, very focused eyes. And he waited till she passed us. So Rabbi Grossman tells me, Yankel tells me, he says, Rabbi Jacobson, I thought she's going to pass us and he's going to walk home. But I knew that the Rebbe was afraid, justifiably, that we're going to go after her. And we are going to give her such rebuke and musar. He said, so the Rebbe stood and did not move and waited and waited and waited until she got to her house. We couldn't catch up to her. She walked and walked and walked. He says, I don't know if it was a half a mile or a mile. He just waited and looked. Maybe he also waited for her to get home because of other reasons, maybe because of the hour at night. When she was completely gone from our eyesight and we could not catch up to her and he felt she was safe, he turned around and he went home and we followed him home. A little story, but it teaches you so much, my dear friends, about what Torah does to a person. What a Ben Torah is and what a Bas Torah is. In these small little moments, it teaches you that the foundation of foundations is menschlichkeit, empathy, love, affection, sensitivity, connection. And the more religious, the more sensitive. The more God-fearing, the more empathetic. The more frum, the more you see godliness in every person and in every situation. This is the derech eretz that Chazal say is not just the introduction for Torah, but it imbues Torah with the divine dignity that we, the nation that was given the Torah, ought to introduce to ourselves, our homes, our community, and the world at large, until that moment when this truth will emerge in its full glory. The oneness that connects all of us and connects the whole world. B'mheira b'yameinu, amen. Thank you.
Inspiring, unbelievable shir, Rabbi Jacobson. That was amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just want to thank our dear sponsors for tonight's event. We dedicated the event to memory of Jack Freeman, Yosef, Ben Nathan, the Pharaoh Bachai, Neshama, Karen, Aliyah. Once again, thank you very much to the Freeman, Muslim families, and all those that were involved.
Thank you.
Very big thank you to all those that have behind the scenes promoted this year.
Thank you, Chazak. Thank you. Just to remind everybody, tomorrow morning, Tuesday morning, 9:45 a.m., right here on the yeshiva.net, special class for Shavuos, 9:45 Tuesday morning, the yeshiva.net. Tuesday, 1 o'clock, Timer Dvorer of Moshe Cordovero, 10-minute class. Thursday morning, 7:30, we continue the extraordinary discourse of the Baal HaTanya about the essence of Torah. Those of you who live in Monsey, 8:15 Wednesday evening, in the tent, behind 24 Shea, 10-3, we have a special lecture for women, enhancing your marriages, enhancing your relationships, 8:15 p.m., women and girls in Monsey, at the tent behind 18 Shea Road. That's this Wednesday evening. Wishing you a wonderful and beautiful night, a lot of love and light and blessings. Thank you.
Website chazak.org. Visit the website, be part of the revolution. And Mizatchim, we should have a Chag Sameach, a happy Shavuot. Mizatchim, we should continue learning Torah, be inspired from the Torah. Mizatchim, we should also
Girls in Muncie.
redemption.
Amen.
In our days. Amen. Thank you very much.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Chazak. Thank you for this tremendous opportunity. Thank you, everybody who's here. And let's bless each other and pray with each other that we should take these moments and weeks when the Jewish people have been triggered and aroused in very powerful ways to really elevate our paradigm. Huh? What'd you say? You hear me?
You're doing another share now? Like I see the rabbi is speaking now.
No, I'm with you.
Okay,
I just wanted to finish with a blessing, if I may.
Of course, please.
Okay, I just want to...
Rabbi, the recording is still on.
Oh, it's off?
Let's get the blessing anyways, Rabbi. We'll put it online. Give us a big...
I wanted to say that these are days and weeks that the Jewish people have been aroused in very profound ways. We should utilize this opportunity to be able to expand our paradigms and extricate ourselves from a small, petty exile mentality into a geula, expansive divine consciousness of oneness. Chazak, thank you.
Kindly Torah talk, Rabbi. It's great when the Rabbi speaks to the camera and you have thousands of people. But when there's a question and answer format back and forth, you can know the numbers really skyrocket. It makes it more interesting. So we prepare about 4 or 5 questions on one topic, and then we ask the Rabbi to end up with a final thought.
Perfect.
Yeah, you want to do it now? Rabbi, you ready?
Right now I can't, but we can make a time.
We'll make a time. Okay, great.
By the way, you can also have live questions. People do it all the time.
So
they can chat their questions or Q&A. They can text it.
But we're not we haven't gotten to that madriga yet. We're still pre-recorded. It's much easier for us.
Okay.
You want to schedule something now, Rabbi? We'll schedule for a topic of simcha. Right now, people need.
The person who schedules, I have to send them because it's a calendar issue. So.
Yeah. Okay, looking forward to seeing you in person.
Thank you for the schus. Thank you for the schus.
Yeshiva Sharitzin has a dinner. I'll reach out to Rabbi. They wanted the Rabbi to speak over there, so I'll keep you posted.
Okay, thank you so much. Chag Sameach. We should hear good news from everybody.
Amen.
Bye-bye.